I'm about to play Cyberpunk 2077 on this 14-year-old Mac Pro. It's tricked out with modern graphics, SSD storage, and 48 gigabytes of RAM. Let's check it out. Okay, I'll tell you a secret. Although I'm a PC at heart, I've always wanted a Mac Pro. Ever since the Power Mac G5, I've had lustful eyes on the Mac. Whilst I was building beige boxes, I kept seeing this metal masterpiece in magazine and print. I mean, look at it. Jealous types call it the cheese grater, but for me, this is a workstation wonder, and I spent many years dreaming that one day I'd have enough money to buy one. Even today, these are still popular for PC sleeper builds. You can spend $100 or more for a used case, and then the same again for an ATX conversion kit. But the good news is you don't need to do that. If you're patient, you can pick up a full working machine at a great price, and in stark contrast to today's Macs, they are super upgradable. After some bargain hunting, I picked up this fully working Mac on eBay for $148. It's a mid-2010 machine, but even with original specs, it's still well stacked with 16 gigabytes of RAM, a 2 terabyte hard disk, a Radeon HD 5770, that's a special Mac version, and most importantly, dual Xeon CPUs. This is a lot of horsepower for the money, but we can do better. I warmed up the credit card some more, spending $15 for 32 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. I also bought some cheap SSDs and a pair of the fastest possible CPUs for the Mac Pro. These are quad-core Xeon X5690s, and I paid $60 for the pair. As received, this is running 2017's macOS High Sierra. Graphics are decent for a 14-year-old machine. Older titles like Half-Life 2 and even Portal run great, but let's be realistic. This is a 1 gigabyte GPU, so modern AAA games are likely off the menu. Looking at synthetics, Geekbench has a single-core score of 489 and a multi-core score of 3180. So single-core's not great, but thanks to the dual CPUs, multi-core is roughly in line with a Core i5-4690. Not too bad, but I think we can do better. Time for the upgrades. One of the awesome things about this Mac is the modular design. The CPUs and memory are on a separate daughter board, 2 latches, and you can slide the whole thing out. We have these hefty heat sinks to keep things cool. With a long hex key, they come off relatively easily. Add some thermal paste, tighten down the screws, and our new Westmere CPUs are firmly in place. For RAM, we have 8 slots, for an official memory max of 128 gigabytes, and even more if we want to go unsupported. If you fill 2, 4, or 8 slots, the memory will run in dual channel mode. But with 3 or 6, you can have triple channel. Luckily for us, no one wants DDR3 anymore, so I picked up these matching 8GB sticks for super cheap, less than $4 each. In they go. With the CPUs and memory in place, we move up to the mid layer. This is where we have the PCI Express expansion slots and SATA hard disks. It's all toolless, with thumb screws for the expansion cards and 4 removable sleds for the SATA hard drives. You can really pack this with storage if you wanted to. Up top, we have the optical drive caddy, with space for 2 5¼ drives. Lastly, we have a super generous 980 watt power supply. This is still a lot in 2024, but in 2010 this was a monster. Overall, this is a super clean design, and the upgrades were trivial to make. Time for testing. Looking in Geekbench, we can see the new CPUs and memory are detected OK. We also have a nice core clock boost from 2.4 to 3.46 GHz. In terms of benchmark results, we're now at 672 for single core and a whopping 6,383 for multi-core. That is a big jump, more than double, and this puts us in line with a Core i7-9700. This is getting good. Memory gets a speed boost too, jumping from around 13 to 20 gigabytes per second for sequential reads. We're getting speedy. Since we have lots of RAM, let's try something very 2024, AI language models. I installed Llama CPP, which allows us to run LLM inference with CPUs and system memory. This needs a huge amount of RAM. For some models, 16 gigabytes or even 32 gigabytes won't do it. But on our vintage Mac, no problem. Check this out. Now we're feeling good, let's push the limit on graphics. I installed Borderlands 3 and... okay, we have a showstopper. Modern Mac games need a GPU that supports the Metal graphics API, and this old Radeon GPU does not do that. Time to do some thinking. Okay, this is where I abandoned reason for madness. Up until now, the build has been modest and relatively cheap. I think I spent $250 in total. But now I want the performance crown. I bought this Radeon RX 6600 XT for another $250. And the reason I did this is because 1. This is the newest class of GPU that will work on the Mac Pro. 2. It's an 8GB card with enough VRAM for modern AAA games and perhaps even some ray tracing. And number 3, it works within the Mac Pro's power budget. So I broke my budget, but I think it's worth it. Let's give it a go. To get the GPU working, we have to jump through a few hoops. First, we have to upgrade the OS. I used a tool called OpenCore Legacy Patcher to download and then install macOS Monterey. This is a newer version of macOS from 2021, and it bundles the updated drivers we need for our GPU. Second, I installed the GPU into a regular PC and flashed a custom firmware. This modifies the initialization code so the Mac can boot with the new card installed. Finally, I transferred the new GPU to the Mac. With the patched firmware in place, Monterey loaded OK, and the card is reported working. So, with that dance out the way, it's the moment of truth. Does Borderlands 3 run? Well, yes it does, and it runs great. A locked 60 frames per second at 1080p. Other Mac games like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and No Man's Sky also run well. Not bad for a 14 years old Mac. As a side note, I was surprised, in a good way, at the number of Mac games in my Steam and Epic library. I bought all these games for PC, so it's great to see them cross over and that cross-buy support is still alive and kicking. Another nice surprise is Apple Arcade. Heading to the App Store, a ton of games just work, and they work well. There are some snackable games like Jetpack Joyride, indie classics like Limbo, and even some graphics showcases like Oceanhorn and The Pathless. But this is just the appetizer. We want AAA gaming, and for that main course we need Windows 11. The OS installed without much fuss. You can use Rufus to create install media, and the instructions on the OpenCore website are super clear. As a side note, you get this boot picker to toggle between Windows and macOS. It's nice. With Windows 11 installed, it works just like a regular PC, and the performance is great. The OS is snappy. You could definitely use this as your daily driver. 3D Mark puts up some decent numbers, and in terms of games, Crysis is no challenge at all. It's time to take this up one level to Cyberpunk. So what do you think? Personally, I think this Mac Pro puts the modern variants to shame. This thing is ultra upgradable, and with some investment can still give a great experience in 2024. I'm not quite finished with the journey. Soon I'd like to add NVMe storage, and I also have these nice SSD sleds for quickly switching 2.5-inch drives. What are your thoughts? Are you tempted to build your own Mac monster? Comments and questions down below. Enjoy!